Good evening. My name is Sandra Fritz. I'm the chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee. Welcome to our meeting of October 25th. Tonight's meeting is broadcast live on Selco channels 29 and 329, and it's also streamed on Shrewsbury Media Connections website. I'd like to thank Liz Poplowski, who helps with all of our meetings. Tonight, first on the agenda is public participation. No one has asked to address the committee this evening. However, if anybody wishes to join us for this portion of our meeting in the future, please contact us at schoolcommittee@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us. Next is chairperson and members' reports. Anything? Nothing? Thank you. Next is superintendent's report.
Just one item this evening that's hot off the presses. I am really pleased to announce that received a communication earlier today from the Massachusetts School Building Authority that after a very thorough process they go through, which included a visit with a team of their executives and some technical staff this past summer, they have designated the Major Howard W. Beale School as an official MSBA model school. And the letter we received indicates that their model school program was created to effectively adapt and reuse the design of successful, recently constructed elementary, middle, and high schools. So essentially, the Beale School design is so effective that the State Building Authority has designated as one to be emulated by other communities, which I want to sort of thank everyone involved with that. Primarily, of course, the designers are architects from LPAA in Worcester, Katie Crockett and Sean Brennan, who were the leads on the project. And I certainly want to mention both Chris Girardi and Amy Clowder in the audience tonight, and Meg Belcito, who's not here this evening. Chris as the principal of the Beale School at the time, Amy in her role around curriculum leadership, Meg in her role around student services, and certainly Patrick Collins, who was the assistant superintendent for finance. They all worked very hard with LPA around making sure that the design of the school met the educational demands of the 21st century and the programming that we wish to have in our school district. And anyone who's been in the school knows it is just a phenomenal building in terms of meeting the needs of students and being beautiful and so well functioning on top of that. As the phrase goes, form follows function. It is an incredibly functional space that's going to be an effective place for student learning for decades. So again, congratulations to everyone involved. This actually adds to our portfolio because early in their model school program, they designated Shrewsbury High School, even though Shrewsbury High School was constructed before the Mass School Building Authority came about. They did designate elements of that as a model. And then Sherwood Middle School also went through the same process and is also an MSBA model school. So kudos again, and the same architects, LPAA, who were involved with all three of those projects. So congratulations, and that's a real feather in the cap for our community.
Great.
So that's superintendent's report this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. First on the agenda this evening, we are going to have the Shrewsbury High School Student Advisory Committee. Under Massachusetts Education Reform Act, school districts are required to have a student advisory committee consisting of 5 high school students who are elected by their student body, and they're here with us this evening to give us their first report of the school year. So if you'd like to come forward and have a seat. And once you're settled, if you can introduce yourselves for those watching at home, too.
Good evening. My name is Siri Ural. I am a senior and I am the chairperson of the Student Advisory Committee. Thank you so much for having us here today to share our agenda. My fellow members will now go down the line and introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Venkata Dagareddy, and I'm a senior at the high school.
Hi, my name is Anya Gupta, and I'm also a senior at the high school.
I'm Noah Chonk, and I'm a junior.
I'm Caroline, I'm a junior as well.
First on agenda today is student life. With the school year nearing the end of a quarter, the student body is adjusting to recent changes.
So senior year has been off to a great start. With my last year of high school starting, dealing with college applications and AP coursework has been challenging to balance. Thankfully, assistance from staff and teachers has helped make senior year manageable. Additionally, the senior celebrations and school spirit events have helped turn this difficult period into an exciting one to remember.
So far, this year has been busy, filled with college applications and juggling classes, but seeing everyone from students and teachers and attending all the senior events has made everything just a little bit easier. Moreover, the support from all my teachers and peers has been so helpful. I look forward to these next few months as I start to apply to colleges.
While us seniors are focusing on plans for the future, whatever those may be, our incoming class is just beginning their high school journeys. The freshmen are settling well into the school with the assistance of the Mentor Volunteer Program, or MVP, which is the program where upperclassmen go to freshman homerooms and ease them into the high school life. Freshmen have quickly become involved in the SHS community through performing arts departments, co-curriculars, and sports teams.
For myself and for many of my classmates, junior year has been off to an exciting and sometimes stressful start, but overall is going well. There's new APs, many more of us have jobs now, sports and sleep are being taken more seriously, and finding a balance can be challenging at times. Despite this, I've heard and seen many great things from a lot of people about performing better in classes, getting to bed earlier, and overall feeling more in control of their lives.
Junior year has kicked off and with an exceptional increase in workload. AP classes, college searching, and fall sports seasons has provided a very busy schedule. Our school counseling staff has been able to help us navigate APs, testing, and the college board. I just took the PSAT last weekend, and I'm looking forward towards the SAT and ACT next spring along with my fellow classmates.
No homework weekends. Even though we've only been in school for 2 months, we've already had 3 no homework weekends. I think that everyone agrees that they definitely don't hurt. However, people that I've talked to have expressed that they end up just doubling the work due the following Tuesday or Wednesday. With AP classes and more rigorous courses that require consistent out-of-class workload to keep up, sometimes it feels like the no homework weekends end up inconsequential. That said, having no homework for a few days in regular classes is always welcome.
This is school start times. With school starting 20 minutes later, most students didn't think that it would actually make a difference. However, most people feel like they're getting a bit more sleep, especially those that are having to take the bus to school. I've seen that mornings are way less rushed and stressful as well. In general, the later start is decently popular. However, many aren't particularly thrilled with how early lunches are and how at times there are 3 periods after lunch. But we understand that this is a trade-off. For those with jobs and other commitments, the later end time has caused a time pinch between shifts and independent sports. For school-affiliated sports, end times have gotten later, sometimes ending after dark.
Phone policy. Perhaps the most controversial change to the start of the year was the implementation of a known phone policy in classrooms and advisories. Although initially met with severe disliking from the student body, feelings regarding the change have improved significantly. The freshmen, coming from Oak, didn't see too much of a change in their classroom settings, but the older students have also settled into the change fairly well. On the other hand, teachers seem to really appreciate the no phone policy, with AP teachers in particular saying that their classes are a lot more productive without distractions.
School lunch. Lunch overall has improved over the past couple of years. The increase in staff has helped the lines move along much quicker, and there's healthy options to choose from. Most often, the general consensus is that entrees each day are liked, and the choices presented, from salads to pizza, make sure that everyone has something that they like.
Next up on our agenda, we have co-curriculars. SHS students have had a great time getting involved with co-curriculars outside of school. First, we have speech and debate. The SHS speech and debate team just kicked off our season with an incredible start at the Yale Invitational in September. With 5 national finalists, the students competing led SHS to our strongest performance at any national tournament in the past 25 years, taking home a team award for number 2 in the nation. In the upcoming weeks, local tournaments will be kicking off, and we are so excited to bring this momentum with us.
DECA, in only their second year as a club at SHS, Distributive Education Clubs of America, or DECA for short, has become the largest club at school, boasting over 200 members. From participating at a leadership conference to fundraising $100+ during Colonial Way, our high school chapter leaders have shown their interest and commitment to helping the club succeed and grow even more. With district competitions in January, both the officers and the club members are looking to hit the ground running to qualify for state level competition.
SHS Sports and Logistics. The fall season is going strong for Shrewsbury, with the boys soccer team winning their league championship. One concern is the lack of buses in circulation to transport all teams to their games and meets on time. Despite the shortage of drivers, buses were once able to drop teams off in between carrying out middle school routes and dropping off middle school teams, but after end times were adjusted, this is no longer possible. This has led to teams being late and buses being completely full. Additionally, as Caroline mentioned, teams will soon be competing with the daylight, having only a couple hours between the final bell and sunset.
Events at SHS. Students have been finding ways to strengthen the SHS community through different events.
All-school meeting. On September 26, Shrewsbury High School came together to celebrate the diversity within our community, placing a spotlight on a high school senior, Kubra Mohammadi. Kubra came to Shrewsbury High School last year after escaping from the Taliban that destroyed her home. Yet despite these challenges, Kubra embodies the definition of perseverance and strength. Right after moving to Shrewsbury, she took to the stage, placing 4th at nationals for speech, while spreading her story and raising awareness for the struggles her community faces back home. We gathered in the gym to hear her story, and students gained a new perspective. We learned about the struggles Kubra faced in getting an education and going to school as a female. This allowed us to reflect on our own resources that we have at Shrewsbury High School and appreciate the sense of belonging we all have.
Activity Fair. An annual event at SHS, the Activity Fair has continued to provide opportunities for clubs to gain new members. In the fair, club officers presented information about their clubs in the Commons in order to garner underclassmen awareness and interest. As a member of MVP, I was able to get some feedback on the fair from freshmen. In general, opinions of the fair were mixed. With 30-plus clubs available, many freshmen were enthusiastic about the various options. Conversely, the fair being in the Commons had a negative response, with most students concerned about how crowded it was and the difficulty of seeing and learning about all the clubs. Suggestions like a slideshow or album of each club were offered, but reverting it to the field house was overwhelmingly agreed upon by club officials and underclassmen alike.
Colonial Way. On September 14th, Shrewsbury High School ran another successful Colonial Way, with over 40 clubs running booths from Student Council to Black History Committee to crew. Clubs raised funds and had fun with students, staff, and the community. Of the booths present, Fashion Club raised the most while selling jewelry. Overall, the night was a huge success, with Shrewsbury also winning the football game right after.
Fall concerts. SSMA, Shrewsbury Schools Music Theater Association, kicked off their first concert with performances from our chamber choir, wind ensemble, mixed choir, treble choir, and chamber orchestra, with the addition of Sea Wing's new band director, Miss Wardwell, who had been welcomed with open arms. From cultural songs to Pirates of the Caribbean, the performances were incredibly successful as each group got to showcase their talent and hard work.
Thank you for your continuous support of the Student Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I just want to thank you for your report. Extremely informative. I really appreciate you giving your feedback on the start times, since that's something that we just implemented. So we really like to hear from the students and your perspective on that. Additionally, the news about that the DECA Club, that there's 200 members. That's really for a club that's just been formed for going into its second year. So thank you. Really informative. Lots of good information for us to take in. Appreciate it.
I have a question also around the clubs and activities. Once we remove the fees, are you seeing more students or hearing more students are able to now participate? Is that something we're seeing an increase in clubs? I mean, DECA, like you said, for that many already. So is that helping with that fee removal?
I think, in my opinion, I also run a club at SHS. It's a club called HOSA, and it's medically centered. And we're also new at Shrewsbury High School. And I think that just from sophomore year, junior year, and senior year, I've definitely seen a really big increase in membership. And I do think that removing that activity fee had a big part in that. So.
Excellent. And my second question is around the phone policy. For somebody who's at home and doesn't know what that is, could somebody explain that for the public, what the phone policy actually is and where the where your phones are during the day and those things?
Yeah, of course. So when we came in at the beginning of the year, an announcement was made, and essentially it told us that during classrooms and our advisories, which is where we meet with our homeroom every week, we now have to keep our phones in our bags and essentially out of sight. So in doing so, we're only focusing on our classwork or in advisories, community building, and as I said, it has had some mixed reactions, but I think overall the feeling about it is getting significantly better.
Great, thank you. And I also want to thank Mr. Smith, who's here, your advisor, social sciences teacher at the high school, who's been a longtime advisor. I see you back there. So thank you again. Dr. Sir, any comments or questions?
Thank you for, again, a very informative report, and appreciate the continuing members and the new members of the advisory committee. And just so those watching know, they are elected by their peers, just as our student council members and class officers. So they've been selected by their peers to represent them, and appreciate the context. I appreciated the mention of some of the work that the school, Mr. Bazidlo, the all-school meeting, Kubra Mohammadi being able to speak and share her message. And you mentioned this idea of belonging, and that's something that's very important goal for us is to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure all of our students, regardless of who they are or their identity, feel a real strong sense of belonging in our school community. And we know that although I think we do good work, we have a long way to go. And I'm curious from your perspective if you'd be willing to share anything that you think is either working particularly well right now to help promote that, or things that we could do to continue to try to strive for that goal of students feeling that really deep sense of belonging in their school community.
I can comment on something that I think is working well so far. I think that having clubs like the Asian Culture Club and other clubs that represent different cultures at SHS, and they hold different events throughout the school year, I think having that and having that kind of you get events to look at different cultures, and having that opportunity is really nice at Shrewsbury High School, because not only do you learn more about your culture, you learn about other cultures, and there's a really good sense of belonging within all of that.
Kind of building off of that as well, I know that coming up soon in November, we have a This Is Us night. And I think it's very interesting to see that it's not just called Culture Night, it's a This Is Us night. So it means that any group, it can be an interest group, a cultural group, really anything, can come and talk about something that's important to them, which I think is just as important to include everyone in the community and build that school culture as well.
In addition, I think like one way we can improve on that is maybe like during our advisory periods, we can also like focus on building like not only just like a school community, but like just a sense of belonging in general.
Perfect. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Anything else, Chelsea?
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
the report, and we'll look forward to having you back other times this year for regular updates. So thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
So much.
Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to have a report on the Shrewsbury High School enrollment and class size. Each year, the district is required to provide a report on enrollment as of October 1st to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And tonight, we have Mr. Bazidlo, the high school principal, along with Na Win, the assistant principal for student services, who will present the report. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having us. Again, hard act to follow, right? And my memory serves me correctly, the committee heard the full enrollment district report at the last meeting, correct? So this is a more granular look at the high school and the complexities that we face and see. Of course, I don't have my glasses. Oh, am I just gonna hit play here? Where's play? There we go. Sorry. I got it. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Great, can watch that tomorrow. What a whole meeting. So we're happy to share all the, like I said, all the information. And particularly, I got with me is Na Wen, who's the assistant principal for student services at the high school, and she helps manage the master schedule, works with our director of school counseling around course selection process. And really, we're going to focus on 3 areas tonight. And I think what we've heard from the committee is the size of the school as it relates to building capacity is a third thing. Second, of course, is class size as it relates to school committee policy and guidelines, and also the enrollment trends. So we'll walk you through that and share kind of the facts of the matter. So here's a graph of our enrollments through 2014 through 2024. It's our third highest enrollment in the last 10 years. We have 52 more students than we had last year, and 19 less students in the past 5 years, but 188 total students increase in the last 10 years. So again, I think our projections were a little, the long-term projections were a little off, and I'm not entirely sure why they came back. Might be the housing piece, might be some immigration piece, but the reality is we're a little bit heavier at the high school than we anticipated to be this school year.
And next, we'll talk about the average class size by department. So here we have a chart of the class size, the average class size with each department for the past 5 years. So you can see that for this year, the range of average class size range between 13.6 to 28.1. And when you compare last year to this year, we're looking at for this year, 9 out of 12 departments had an increase in average class size. Compared to last year, there was 4 out of 12 that had an increase in class size. Some of that can be attributed to that increase in enrollment, but overall, in general, the class sizes are pretty good. On this slide, we look at the average class size, focusing on mainly the academic departments. We look at English, math, science, and engineering, and the world language. So looking at the average class size, the good news is that over half, or 64% of the academic class sizes, have 22 or fewer students, which results in 16 actual academic classes out of 448 have students of 27 or more. And when you go to the next slide, we look at this chart. This is a bar graph over a 10-year span of classes that we've had that are over 27 students or more. And you can look at, it's been pretty stable over the past about 7 years or so in terms of classes that are over 27 and over.
Truly a commitment from the committee and allocation of resources for sure, and balancing the schedule. That's a good news story, of course, coming from that 13-14 school year when we had 43% of our class that were over 27. So that's really a good news story. Yeah, we've also, for those, as we pursue more inclusive environments and equity as part of our district's mission, we've increased the number of co-taught sections this school year. From last year we had 12, this year we have 16. In English we have 4 sections, in English 9. In our mathematics we have 4 sections in our foundational algebra geometry 1, and we have 4 sections in algebra geometry 2. And then we have 3 sections of lab biology and 1 section of lab chemistry. So we've increased across the board, and we've had some really good gains academically in those classes. So it's been a overall, again, a really good thing for our students and for our staff.
And next, we look at the counselor caseload. It's been pretty stable over the past 10 years when we look at the ratio of students to counselors. We have 8 counselors in our department. The average caseload is 232 students, but we also look at the number of seniors that each counselor has. So the range of that is between 50 to 61 students, because we think about the application process and what counselors have to do to work with students. But all of our counselors really, they serve as tier 1 supports, especially with the social emotional, before we refer students to their tier 2 supports with the adjustment counselors that we have. And finally, we'll look at the building capacity. To really understand the building capacity, we have to think about the master schedule. In building a master schedule, it's pretty complex. So when we think about the master schedule, we create a schedule according to student choices. And within that, there's also a lot of different constraints. There could be teacher constraints in terms of, Todd talked about the classes that are co-taught. Those teachers need to have the same prep so that they can work together. But rooms are also a challenge and does factor into the master schedule building. So the following slides, what we have is a look at what the available rooms that we have in our academic hallways. So the upper graph looks at the English hallway, and the bottom one is the math hallway. When you see the green, that means that room is actually open for that period. Where you see it's yellow, that means there could be a study in that room that doesn't meet every day, but it's occupied, so you can't put in a full class. And then the next slide has the science and engineering hallway, and underneath that is the social science hallways.
So, we look at these graphs, right? And we talked about the MSBA, and Dr. Sawyer in the superintendent's report talked about the model school. And we're in process with the MSBA around potentially addition at the high school, but we really are, when we look at this, we're out of room. I mean, there's not a lot of room. So when people say, well, we'll just hire more teachers to reduce class size, we're really limited in terms of flexibility of space. Oh, sorry, Matt, I'll let you finish.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
The last slide that you see here are the world language hallways on top, and on the bottom are our computer labs. They're classrooms that are outfitted with computers. But over the years, what we've done with the, for example, the A202, all of these computer lab or rooms outfitted with computers are all classroom, used for classrooms. So the A202 computer lab is really used for math classes and cybersecurity. The B301 are used for the performing and visual arts for classes such as multimedia application or music technology because of the software that's specific to those classes. In M104, it's the computer science classes. And M105 and the media center, the old media center computer lab, are both now business rooms.
So we've carved out space and maximized as much space as we can, and there's really limited availability even for a full computer. If a teacher wanted to bring students to a computer lab, we'd have to use the pods within the media center, or there's select times within, like I think the A202 lab, we might be able to get some classrooms in a day, but there's really not a full dedicated lab for students to go in there and do any type of research if they want to use a big screen, use a computer, not an iPad. So that's definitely a challenge, but we've made the most of what we can with the space we have. With that, we'll ask any questions. I know the report's really long, shows what everyone teaches in the class size, so we're certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. Lindsay?
Yeah, and I just want to really appreciate you for the report. It's one of the most important ones, I think, for us in this time, as you mentioned, as we are looking and thinking about how to expand the high school, how to think about the funding for expanding the high school and the needs. And some of the things that jumped out at me are the percentage of your faculty who are teaching in not more than 2 rooms, but more than 3 rooms. And so I just having been at curriculum night and moving through those hallways and imagining moving my classroom instructional materials in a relatively short amount of time, I want to just acknowledge the pressures that our staff are under to kind of do that. And you can even think about during curriculum night, we were in there and they're like, this isn't the room I'm usually in, but I'm here tonight because, so recognizing that's maybe is not how people perceive teaching to be. They think someone has a classroom and that's sort of their room, and that's clearly not what's happening at the high school at this point in time. Everyone's, moving around, so I just want to appreciate that complexity. I did look. There's a lot here, and I also think you're right. There's a lot of good news stories. I started to kind of drill into in the reports, not so much in your slide deck, but in your written report on pages 7 and 8. You have enrollment by department, and to me, I'm trying to pull out sort of what are the trends, recognizing we have a space issue, and that is always underlying this. But there are some things that I noticed that we have, for instance, the number of young people who are enrolled in an instructional technology course 5 years ago versus today has more than doubled from 370 to 721. Like, oh, that's notable, and we don't have space. And that takes a significant amount of space and other instructional materials. So I wonder if you want to maybe comment on
Sure.
that, how you kind of manage that. The other one that jumped out at me is just a way to think about, I noticed also, we do have some change in demographics, some more young people enrolling who are coming from other countries. And as I look at our world language programs, courses like Latin that had many more students 5 years ago and have fewer students, how we think about sort of world language development. I know we'll have a whole separate time to talk about world languages, but when I think about what are the trends of what folks are interested in, I know business is certainly an area. I don't know which bucket, honestly, that one falls into of all these buckets, but I also know visual arts has kind of gone down by like 100 students. And so I just wonder how you think about if that's reflective of what the students' desires are. I know we do a really good job matching students with their course selection, or if it's space constraints or really a changing interest that we're seeing over time in some of these.
Yes.
Yeah.
So probably all those things.
Sorry.
Let me speak. Yeah, no, I think all those things are probably some portion accurate in some regard. So I think when we look at the instructional technology back in 1920, and I don't think this chart was in our deck, but there's, like you said, 370 students enrolled, and now we have 721. I mean, that's a function of the committee allocating resources to hire another business teacher, because business falls under our instructional
Okay.
technology department.
Got it.
When you think about that, we think about semester electives. That's when you see things like in social science, we have 2,126 seats available, or students enrolled in social science. We have semester electives, so we have,
Got it.
I might take 2 semesters of classes. That each one of those courses counts for 1 course, so additional seats. So we'll see that in math as well. We have more math students enrolled in mathematics actually than we actually have enrolled at the high school. Another real popular piece of that. Yeah, and some of the trends that we've had conversations with, and I have a conversation with Pamela Blank, who's our director of visual arts, is how do we get more students interested in visual arts coming out of the middle school? So part of what we're working on this year is a new process around course selection, where we're actually gonna have more presentations for middle school students. I've been working with Mrs. Burak at the middle school and her counseling staff, along with Angie Flynn, our director, try and bring our counselors into the middle school to show actually what the whole course selection and course sequence could be, and all the opportunities to give people that know it probably more intimately than the middle school counselors would, to try and shore that up, and have Mrs. Blank also there to try and promote her department. Additionally, the Latin is a real concern. I know Dr. Sawyer and I talked about that, and as you saw in the report, we have 2 Latin teachers. We've had to allocate FTE to different departments. They're teaching out of their discipline, but that has afforded us more electives. So we're still keeping those people employed, but they're teaching, one's teaching in the social science department, 2 semester electives, and one's teaching in the English department, 2 semester electives. We met with Mr. Almeida and the teachers at the end of the last school year with this conundrum of what are we going to do, and we had an opportunity where they were willing to teach in different areas and different disciplines. We kind of gave them a menu, so to speak, of where we thought demand was based on student choice through course selection process, and they worked it out with us, and we found, like, here's kind of what we think we could do, and they were in agreement, like, yes, let's try and do this, or I want to try and do that versus this, and that worked out for us. So it's benefited, although we have a reduction in Latin, in terms of total enrollment, it's benefited other students by providing more electives in other areas, which is, again, I think is really a good opportunity. But I do think, you look across the board, there's certainly space challenges, and like you said, Mrs. Heffernan, think about this, we have, say, about 150 staff, give or take, teachers, and we have like 1 out of every 5 is teaching in more than 3 classrooms a day. They're traveling that much. So when you think about that parent night and you walk around and just the congestion with, maybe 2 parents for our enrollment, we don't get every parent there. I feel a lot hallways that night are pretty open and not as crowded as they are during the school day. So yeah, we add more adults to it, it gets more complicated, and it creates more stress on the system, certainly. That's one of the pressures I think our teachers would say, is like they really would like to be, and we try and keep them in their wings close to their home base, but that's not always possible. So yeah, it's another stressor that our teachers have had to endure, certainly.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I think just a comment on the whole building capacity, it's something that we've been talking about as a community for a long time, and it's, we are hoping to get into that MSBA pipeline, and the whole funding piece will be there, but this is just, because we can talk about the building capacity and the number of students, but I mentioned it during the district report, it's also the mix of students and the student needs, and you may need more space for different types of needs, and we're seeing some changes at the high school now with the ELL, and so even though we're crowded, we also have different needs and we're crowded. So there's a lot that goes into this all at the same time. So it's not just numbers, it's a whole bunch of things that we need to think about as a community and for educational services. And the students talking about the Commons, which is a pretty big area, being crowded and uncomfortable. So we're lucky we have a field house, but that field house is also used for other things. So it doesn't seem like there's a easy solution for any of it. Thank you for always doing the best you can to make it as good as possible for students, but I do feel for teachers who have to pick up everything and move to another room, and I wouldn't want to do that in my workplace, so I think it's just a whole difficult situation. But thank you. I hope, we get into this MSBA pipeline and we can add some relief to the high school that's greatly needed. Anything further? Anything, Dr. Sawyer?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Nguyen, and for all the information in the report, and her and Mr. Pidlow for presenting this. A couple pieces I think that are important to note. First off, some of the increase in student enrollment is certainly tied to the lack of access to Assabet Valley Technical High School. We now have 2 classes of students that we would have likely had 25 to 35 students attend, and those students are instead at Shrewsbury High School. If you took that average of sort of 30 per class and took 60 out of the mix, would be at about just 1,813 kids, which would be actually significantly lower than we were a few years ago. In the next 2 years, that will continue until we reach a point where we'll have roughly an extra 120 students at the high school across 4 grades who otherwise would have been in Assabet. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something we certainly stressed with the MSBA when they visited to talk about our statement of interest around the potential of a high school addition. They visited a few weeks ago, and they toured the building, went over all the points, and saw the crowded hallways. They saw dismissal. They saw, in spaces we've converted, and they saw the fact that we have these teachers who are itinerant when we'd like them not to be. And sometimes itinerant across multiple rooms, typically 3 and even sometimes more. Spaces that used to be computer labs now used as classrooms, all the pieces that were mentioned. I think that's just important to stress. The other element of programming-wise, which is related to that, is that one of our strategic priorities is to provide more options for career and technical education for students because they don't have access to ASABET anymore, but also to benefit other students too who may not have considered ASABET in the first place. We do have some classrooms that are dedicated to Project Lead the Way classes, engineering spaces, and we may be modifying those or updating those. We're in the process of applying for a career innovation pathways grant with the state. In terms of any sort of significant expansion, there just isn't space to do that. So we're going to have to, again, continue to be creative with existing space around what kinds of courses are offered. And we will be limited in terms of what that would look like. We stressed MSBA. We do not offer as many electives as some of our peer high schools would in certain areas. But that is, obviously there would be an expense for faculty, and that's not to be discounted. That said, there's really no place to put them if we were trying to add any significant new programs. So, we continue to look at thoughtfully, and I appreciate the high school teams thinking about ways to utilize space as efficiently as possible. But there just are some limitations that are realities right now, just given the size. And in terms of the, over time, we were predicted to sort of settle out at about 1,700 students, but that projection was done prior to the ASABET piece. So it's, quite likely it might be more like 1,800 students. Obviously, over time, we continue to monitor that very closely. But the building essentially was built for 1,375. As the architects presented last year at the space study, the actual design capacity now, to your point, Ms. Fritz, with changing programs, changing demands, changing mandates from the state around student programming, the design of Shrewsbury High School, if it were to be built today, it's really about 1,250 or so is the design capacity. And so we're more than a local high school enrollment, more than that. I mean, we're one of the larger high schools in central Massachusetts, second largest, I think, in the area. When you're talking about having 500 plus more kids than it's designed for, you're going to run into all these different limitations and constrictions on your program. So thankfully, we have a wonderful program. There's lots of options for kids. There's terrific work happening. It's a wonderful place for kids to go to school. But there are stresses there that are related to being overcrowded that I think are very well articulated by this report. So thank you for the information. And we'll probably know by early December whether MSBA is going to invite us to continue into this process for potentially an expansion. And obviously, we'll be communicating once we have more information about that.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to have a report, literacy initiative update from Ms. Clowder, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. And this is something that we've talked about quite a bit as a committee during our last budget cycle, and seeing this as one of our most important strategic priorities that we're working on right now.
Thank you. As you know, I've been challenged to give a brief update about a topic I'm really passionate about. So I've got my timer out here. I'm gonna try to be really brief. And talk about 4 things. Essentially, the personnel that we've had, the practices we're looking to shift, the professional development that's planned, and kind of the programming. And I'll leave lots of time at the end for questions because that will help me inform future presentations. So, first of all, I want to thank you. I know your advocacy resulted in adding several positions to the district, and that's made all the difference in terms of supporting students in need. So, standing behind each of these women, these are our reading specialists, are a team of tutors and teachers and other district leaders committed to student success. Reading specialists serve a bunch of different stakeholders. Primarily, they support students But they also, in addition to providing direct support, train and supervise tutors who also support students. And finally, they're another specialist in supportive teachers, and that's particularly been important when we look at student data and think about what trends we're seeing and how that might impact our curriculum and our practices in the classroom. And also troubleshoot when we're trying to figure out, of all the things that a student is struggling with, what's the most important and what's the progression of skills. It's helpful to have a panel of people to kind of call and consult. So I'm really grateful for your support and adding those reading specialists to our team. They've been a really great resource. One person who's not featured here, but who's also been a significant help, is Kristen Osborne. We received the Mass Tiered Literacy Grant a few years ago. It's our second year. That bought us a little bit of technical assistance through DESE, but with your support, we were able to expand the time she works with us to 3 days a week. I'm just going to start with a big picture of kind of the a model. This is called Scarborough's Rope, which is a model for understanding how different skills required for reading success are woven together. And the key message here is that both sides of the rope, the language comprehension piece and the word recognition piece, are important if students are going to be skillful. And the fall, professional development for general educators, is focused on the word recognition side of the rope. In future reports, I'll be happy to update you on the approach to language comprehension, but I wanted to really think about the first part of our work has been both provisioning for consistent program supports in terms of curriculum materials for grades K to 5, who all have standards underneath the categories of phonological awareness, decoding, spelling, and sight recognition. So we added Haggerty, which is a phonemic awareness program, to kindergarten. Kindergarten through grade 2 had been using Foundations, so it made sense to expand a familiar program both for students and staff into grade 3. We added 95% Phonics, which is a program for grades 4 and 5, and then multisyllabic kind of routines for grade 6. So taken together, we have kind of consistent, high-quality instructional materials to focus on that bottom part of Scarborough's Rope. And all the teachers, in addition to unpacking those boxes and provisioning them with those materials, have had some training on how to implement them, given that it's new. So I really want to acknowledge the significant investment of time that teachers have already put in. Our teachers on the Literacy Council completed the equivalent of a district grad course over the summer if they hadn't been on the Literacy Council, and that just continues to grow. And with, if you can read Kelly sitting behind me, she signed up for even more PD by being an early implementer. So I think the other piece here is really thinking about, in addition to you looking at curriculum materials, we're really looking at our processes for looking at and collecting information about student performance. So we've been using the STAR screener. STAR has also these progress monitoring tools that we've been using, and they're very quick. It allows us not just to know how kids are progressing with the reading supports that we've provided them, if they're not yet where they want them to be, but it also gives us a sense of how we pinpoint the barriers that might be holding them back. So the fancy word for this is kind of a curriculum-based measure. We call them CBMs. I know people hate acronyms, but essentially they're just like little diagnostics, tools that help us keep track of, with the support that we're providing, are we seeing students develop that automaticity that was important when the strands of the rope were woven together. At the middle level, they use DIBELS because STAR ends at grade 6 in terms of some of their progress monitoring tools, but with the help of our data specialist, Jeff Thayer, he created our own kind of metric for being able to progress monitor. So as a result of our data cycles, you can see that we're tracking student progress in a really planful way and consistently across all grade levels on a regulated schedule. And you had that full schedule included in the more detailed report. Kindergarten hasn't yet to be assessed. We'll begin that work in November because we obviously give them a little bit more time to acclimate, so we'll have data on kindergarten too. So in addition to that, in order to build our collective capacity, general educators will have 22 and a half hours of PD on literacy this year. This pie graph represents kind of the total hours, and the orange is how much has been accomplished so far. So you can see they're a third of the way through the PD that's been planned. And the way that the professional learning has been structured is that as we focus on a certain strand or skill, we ask teachers to shift their practice in response to that. So at this point, they've completed 2 days on looking at the word recognition side of the rope and should be establishing and following through on consistent routines for supporting word recognition and phonics skills. So if you have kids that are playing school at home, you might start seeing baby echo. You might start hearing some of those routines in practice. We hope that that's the case. And finally, I wouldn't be doing anybody a good service in my role as advocate if I didn't mention that although I'm grateful for the support we have so far, in order for us to continue, we require continued investment and additional resources. Time is the precious commodity in schools, but it's not the only one. So as we look at kind of our students in need and we look at scheduling and we think about how to grow from here, we're going to need to kind of continually invest in supporting our teachers, because we know if you've ever tried to think about, all right, well, indulge me for a second. Cross your arms the way you normally cross your arms. Okay, now try to do it the opposite way.
Feels weird.
It feels a little weird, right?
Yep.
Our teachers are shifting their practice, and they might hear about why that's important and still need support in being able to do it. And so I just want to make sure that we know that this is a change over time and not a quick fix. But I also want to acknowledge that our teachers are really our strength. As I've mentioned before, they've invested a lot of their time already in thinking about how to shift their practice in support of students. I've highlighted this part of our vision statement for literacy, which was formed by the Literacy Council at the end of last year. And I'm going to read it out loud because for me, when I'm noticing all of the things we have yet to do, this serves as kind of a beacon. So we will provide evidence-based literacy instruction that's explicit, systematic, and aligned across grades pre-K to 6. We will use a comprehensive assessment system to analyze and respond to students' literacy needs, ensuring that all students enjoy the supports and opportunities our district has to offer. You saw earlier in our high school students clear evidence of the opportunities that are there for kids that can access the curriculum, and we want that for everyone. And so I'm confident the shift in our high-quality materials and teacher practice will result in better outcomes for students, and I look forward to sharing more in the future. I don't know how I did with my time.
That's good.
All right, 8 minutes, not great, but.
That's fine. Perfect. Questions, comments in the committee, Lindsay?
Yeah, I certainly want to thank you very much for that update. I think it's important that we communicate to the community how big of a shift this is, how important of an investment it is, how long it takes to change practices on something so, Foundations is your program, but something so foundational as learning to read, right? And we know if kids struggle to learn to read, lots of the rest of their path is going to be really tricky and difficult. And so clearly really core to our work, and really appreciate that you've been able to take it on. Appreciate that you've been able to find good people to also be leaders in the buildings to do this work. Two things that I'm thinking about, and as you said, these can be things to kind of keep thinking about, or you can respond now. How do we bring parents into the change of what we're trying to do is one thing that I'm wondering about. And how, maybe a sub of that, Amy, but you can take it in any way you want, is another piece, is around how do we think about things like, so we know that parents, for instance, look at report cards, and report card standards is one thing that we've talked about in the long term. And so when in the process are things like that something that we're going to be taking a look at? I appreciate maybe it's not quarter one of the first year of a big change, so I understand that, but I was wondering if you can share a little bit as the shared vision continues, sort of where along the pathways some of those things might start to slot themselves in.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. We see parents as partners, and clearly parents need to be partners in this work too. Our first focus has been looking at our data in preparation for sharing that in a more planful way with parents, so that's coming soon. In fact, I'm sending out a communication later to teachers around what that will look like in preparation for parent conferences.
Great.
So we've been focusing on how do we message some of the information we've gleaned about students to parents first, but we clearly need to adjust our report card to reflect kind of the new curriculum we've adopted, as well as what we're learning about the things that we need to focus on to make sure kids become fluent readers.
Great, thank you.
So, obviously, we have so many important things in the district that we're focusing on. Literacy, to me, is so high because we need kids to be able to read, we need kids to be able to understand and comprehend what they're doing. And I would imagine that literacy was hard to teach pre-COVID, but post-COVID world that we're living in is probably even harder to do. So I'll be interested that once students start testing and going through STAR, and then we collect that and we wait till the kindergartners are tested in November, what we come up with and how many kids need extra help and which kids are okay, within the classroom, and having that information shared with families. But once we get that data, once the STAR assessments come out, what is the next step in the plan for students and families? Where do we go from the data?
So first we shared the information with families. Families of students who have qualified for intervention should already have had contact from somebody at school to say, here's what we'd like to do to provide support to your student, and this is what that's going to look like. Because some students are getting support from their classroom teacher as part of just good teaching, right? I'm noticing as I teach this, somebody's not getting it. I'm going to focus more on the kids that aren't getting it yet. Some schools have a specific time during the day for intervention. Actually, all of our schools have a specific time for intervention, and so that's a different level of intensity, but still delivered in many cases by the classroom teacher or a team of teachers. And then there's really intensive support delivered by a tutor and or a reading specialist. And so essentially it's looking at the data to see which students are most in need and aligning the resources that way.
John.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the presentation. I think it's timely after we had our dinner and workshop with the senior leadership team last week, and we did talk about this in our breakout groups, and got a lot of positive feedback about the change itself, but it also comes with anxiety and stress, what they're used to, and certain comments made about, this is the first time in 20 years that they've seen the practice changing. And I'm glad that you highlighted the big picture, which is that, everyone's engaged in kind of learning a new method, and it is a shift in what they do today. And it's just important to recognize this is a big lift, and it's not something that you're going to see the results, overnight or next week or next month. It's going to take some time to see the result, but it's great to see the path of going in this direction. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I know our teachers feel the urgency. I know anybody watching will feel relieved by that, because our motto has been what?
You want me to think this time of day?
It's been progress and not perfection. Yes. Yeah. We know it's going to take time for people to develop more comfort with routines and to certainly see the results for students.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank you for the report. This is not, it's a big undertaking. I liked in the written report that we received, there's already been data meetings taking place and intervention check-in meetings. I mean, a lot of work is already going on. So just for people at home, that this is really underway, fully. And I also wanted to just comment, I thought it was also good to see that the Oak group is being looped into this as well. Even though most of the materials and things are geared to K-6, a lot of work seems to also be taking place at Oak on these initiatives as well.
Yeah, I really want to credit Lisa Daly, who is the ELA coordinator in the middle level, and her colleagues Pam Poitras and Rob Dunn, who have really rallied to think about as students start to apply their understanding or background knowledge to understand more complex text, really focusing on reading across the curriculum is important. And they've recognized that even in a science classroom, most of what scientists do is make sense of articles and reading and studies. So she's really done a nice job of partnering both with Kristen Osborne and her colleagues to think about how do we make some of these shifts, even though they don't have the instructional materials, and how do we integrate that into the pedagogy there.
I want to thank you, Amy, because I know we asked for an early report on this. We felt that this was a big initiative for the school committee and for the district, but it was also challenging. We know this is a lot of work anytime there's change, but I do think we are doing it right. We're moving it, but we're also doing it in a manner that if there's something that needs to be done, we can tweak. We're not just throwing something out there and this is the new thing, we're all going to do it. So I really appreciate that part of it because we're doing it correctly. I love the data piece because I think that's what drives what we're looking for as a committee and when we put resources in and how we help those students who most need this. Because if you can't read and you can't comprehend what you're reading, you can't do any of the other material or subject matters that are before you. And like you said, even at Oak, if someone has having issues with comprehension maybe, we need to make sure that these students are given the resources that they need to be successful when they get to high school and so forth. So thank you. Really appreciate everything. I know this is a really big lift for the district. And if you can, share any staff feedback so far, pros, cons, things that maybe we've tweaked already that we thought we would do differently.
Sure. Well, I think the initial feedback in terms of people voting with their feet, we started with the Literacy Council of 16 and offered to expand that so that we could have a team in each building. And we went from having 16 educators to really having 33. So people were interested in hearing about the experience Literacy Council members were undergoing and wanting to kind of join in on that. And then in terms of the feedback after each professional development segment, we collect feedback from teachers. There's been universal appreciation for the quality of the presentation that have come from Kristen Osborne. I think we've had kind of mixed results for the Zoom presentations about that are curriculum specific because, we had somebody who was presenting on one of our phonics programs who was in the Midwest that seemed to forget that we were on the East Coast, and that was a little frustrating. PD by Zoom is not ideal. But when we've had in-person PD, and certainly when our coaches have supported people in thinking about, now that we've learned this, what are we going to shift in our practice? And teachers always enjoy time to collaborate with each other. So we've tried to structure it with, in a 3-hour chunk, an hour of learning, an hour of thinking about so what, now what, and then an hour of kind of planning. It hasn't always been perfectly aligned that way, but we certainly recognize that those 3 components are really important to supporting professionals.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Sawyer, any comments or questions?
Couple of things. I mean, first off, in my time in Shrewsbury, which is continuing to get longer, more than a quarter century now, which is hard to believe. I can't think of a project that has been more planful and thoughtful in terms of its outlining and then moving forward from planning to execution, and done in a way that really honors our core value of collaboration. I think, and Amy deserves really wonderful kudos on her leadership on this, but it's leadership, which is her style, of course, which has been collaborative leadership with the folks in the field who are doing the work by establishing the Literacy Council last year, connecting with experts from outside in a way that's really thoughtful and getting the right people. And Kristen Osborne's an example of that. I think that tapping into the incredible talent we have and dedication among our educators and among our curriculum leaders, certainly Lisa Daly at the middle school level, our curriculum instructional coaches and curriculum coordinators at the elementary level, to whom you may recall all received an award from me at the start of the school year. Sort of collectively, they're such an effective, thoughtful leadership group. Adding the reading specialists who were very purposely added, even though they're not supervisors, but they are curriculum leaders, and so they've been added to our district leadership team, and that's a strong signal that this is incredibly important work that they're doing. And not only are they providing that direct service to some students and to our very skillful reading tutors, but also are leaders among their peers in terms of teachers who are executing this. I'm very excited about the ongoing updates we're going to see. I think Ms. Fritz is absolutely right that it is a very heavy lift. There's lots to it, and I want to commend our teachers and paraprofessionals who are grappling with, folding their arms in a different way, so to speak, given what Ms. Clowder talked about. It's complex work. And I want to be sure that they know that you as a school committee, certainly I as superintendent, recognize that just like most takeoffs, there's going to be a little turbulence at times, and it's not going to be perfectly smooth. But that it's making a difference. I think we're going to start seeing some, certainly this is a long-term goal. At the same time, I'm very convinced that we're going to start seeing people feeling good about what they're seeing kids develop. Because I think that it seems to me a step removed from it, far from an expert, that the work is the right work, and it's going to be making, in these intervention approaches, it's very systematic in a way, and I mean that in a very positive way. So again, kudos to everyone involved. I think too, just balancing out is that, what are the challenges? How do we help make sure that we're pacing the work correctly? In terms of, we were made aware in a district faculty advisory committee group that, sometimes there are teachers who are going beyond where we even are asking them to, and we don't want to create any additional expectation or stress beyond what we're chunking out in a very purposeful way. But it's in an environment, to Ms. Sharifor's point, post-COVID, that still has a lot of stress in the system, whether that's school districts, society generally. So I think that we have to be thoughtful about the way we keep doing it. But again, kudos to Ms. Clowder and everyone involved for really outstanding work thus far. I think it's going to make a huge difference for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to additional reports as the year goes by, so thank you.
Thank you. I'm very proud of everyone, so good.
We are too. Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to look at the FY25 school department and school committee priorities and guidelines for fiscal year 2025 budget development. Ms. Heffernan and I are on the finance subcommittee. We recently met with Mr. Girardi and Dr. Sawyer to go over this document. You've all had a chance to take a look at it. I'm going to ask Ms. Heffernan to kind of walk through it and give us the thinking behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as all things are done in this district, very collaboratively driven between Ms. Fritz and the department leaders, of course, here. So, or the district leaders, excuse me. You have a 3-page document in your packet, and I think it's important to remind people sort of why do we do this? This is the very beginning of a 6-month budget development process, right? And sort of this, as I see the purpose of this document as a marker sort of to the community and for ourselves, suggesting to the district, what are the things that we think are sort of in lane, in bound, and what are the things that are maybe potentially out of bound? And as we stay at that high level, we have what are the resources coming in to the district, and what are the things that we know that we need or that we need to support and fund. So when we think about what are the resources coming into the district, in paramount for us are things like our override agreement with the town, and we know what that level of funding is going to be. We know what that commitment is. That has to be obviously really important to us. We also know on funding coming in that we're going to use up we're in our last year of ESSER 3 funding, and we have made some choices about how to spend those dollars, and we're going to have to make some choices through this process, again, not tonight, but through this process about do we keep some of those things like late buses, and that has been offsetting some costs about summer programming, and while those are great, we're going to have to make some choices. So those are the resources coming in, and then we think about the things that we need to fund, right, or that we want to fund. Obviously, having recently gone through our strategic planning efforts, and in that, we're highlighting, lifting up literacy. We're probably going to want to keep those great faculty that we just hired to keep this work going forward. But everything in this process is a trade-off, and that is the hard part. So I see this document as an opportunity to kind of communicate out what some of those are. Another important one, of course, for us is the recognition, and we've talked about it a few times over the last few months here, is that the community is seeing, and we saw it in the enrollment numbers as well, an increase in particular around certain segments of need, English language learners, talking about young people who have some particularly needed additional emotional supports, and those are important for us to kind of think about how do we fund them, right? Not just talk about them and put lip service to them, but our budget is really our statement of our priorities. So I'm happy to turn it over to Mr. Girardi in just a second, but what you see then on page 2 of our priorities, really a layout of reminding everybody about that override statement. I think for some of us who lived the pain of going through that, it feels very ever present. For those maybe who are watching who didn't have to do budget development pre-override, how phenomenally different it is for us than it was pre-override, where we were trying to talk about what we were going to cut versus what we were going to sort of grow and build towards. But it is still very much a constrained process. It's a known process, but it's a constrained process, and we can't fund everything. And then it continues on for some of the important district needs that we know mentioned tonight, right? Class sizes are important. Literacy is important. We know that staff well-being is important. We're hearing it, and we're hearing as a profession across America, there's some burnout in education, and so how do we acknowledge that and think about it? But also how do we put that need also in line with mandated services that we have, and some of which are known funding today, right? We can project some increased need in ELL, and some of it over the course of the next 6 months for, out-of-district special ed is that variable that we have a hard time knowing today, but we know we're going to have to no matter what. And so this has been, I think, this is an important sort of marker in time, but it is again the beginning of a much longer conversation for us to keep having about how to balance all of these different things. So, Mr. Girardi, maybe I could ask for your help, or Dr. Sawyer, please, of course, maybe walking through the assumptions and the guidance on that last page, and welcome feedback from our other committee members to kind of hear, did we get it right? Is there anything else that's missing, or that you feel in particular? I'm thinking we had this conversation before we had that dinner where we had an opportunity to kind of talk with building and district leaders, and so maybe there's something else that feels important to be added into that. Do you want to go
Thank
for
you.
it?
Good evening. Very well said, Ms. Heffernan, so thank you. We are at the beginning stages, and we're already underway with our budget with some of the knowns that we can work on, but we are kind of at the starting gates of our marathon of the budget. Something that's really important to us, both with you and both with the community as we're speaking here tonight, is to be as transparent as possible as we're going through the budget season. Again, talking about the things that are known and being able to factor those in early, but also, I think, speaking to Ms. Clowder's point, is there's a process here that we learn more as we go through the season, and we work to shape and adjust the budget so that we are responsive to what the needs are going into next fiscal year. So it's really great to work with you to really learn what you believe is the guidepost, or what we believe as a team, as a collaborative team, to be the guidepost, and to have these guidelines and assumptions to be able to help us kind of navigate the waters as we go through the season, as things pop up on our door that are right in our face, but also making sure that we're able to see the big picture, long-term planning moving forward. The assumptions that we worked on is again, and restating Ms. Heffernan's piece around making sure that we're fiscally responsive and attentive to our override agreement between the school committee and the select board. To provide adequate resources to meet all legal mandates required of the school district. Reflect the terms of collective bargaining agreements and other contractual obligations, and consider the impact of these agreements that will be under negotiation for the coming fiscal year. To provide sufficient resources to maintain our current educational program, as well as our staffing levels necessary to meet mandates and priorities. To utilize the best available information to project changes in costs, tuitions, and then again, back to our revenues, things like our Chapter 70 aid that we're receiving, circuit breaker grants, both the ones that we receive each year and the ones that may adjust over time. ESSER 3 is ending. We're receiving a grant for our emergency homeless students, and really making sure those are taken into account. To estimate level funding for all expected federal and state grants, present options regarding potential continuation of these programs, and the ones that were funded by COVID-related grants that are expiring, again, speaking to the ESSER 3 piece that's expiring next September. Review fee and tuition levels for all programs, make recommendations that consider the school department's increased costs to operate, while also taking into account the associated financial challenges for families. I think it was really nice to hear our students speak to the connection between participation in activities and the barrier being taken away around the fees. So that feedback, again, is stuff that we're listening to very, very closely, and want to make sure that we're responding to our district the way that we should. examine ways to reduce or shift costs in order to achieve district priorities without requiring additional funding allocations wherever possible. Again, the goalposts are moving constantly. Are we able to make smart decisions to use the monies that we have that are known to us to adapt to those changes? And given space constraints at the secondary schools, the administration should assume no new school choice seats will be voted by the school committee for approval. Again, that's something that you vote on each year. We will have a presentation to have that conversation, having listening to Principal Bazidlo, Ms. Wen today, in the graphics on the board with a lot of red crossed out. I think there's a lot of pressure on our upper levels around how many more students we can bring on board in a useful way. So those are the 9 assumptions. A lot of these are consistent over year, really do give some stability to the way that we approach budget. And then again, a number of them are reflective of things that are happening in real time that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to. So with that, any questions or comments from the group, and happy to talk through them.
I would just remind my colleagues that we also had, last year, we knew some of our inflationary costs, such as tuition for out-of-district special ed, grew tremendously last year, will carry through to this year. Now, we didn't have it hit our budget in the way that we feared quite as much because the total number of students went down, and so there was some so last year, but those are some of the things, for instance, in that, projecting our costs is the tricky. The guideposts certainly move. Also, want to just acknowledge, as we mentioned before, currently the state does not have sufficient funds to continue the homeless funding in the way that they have said they want to, but yet that's not budgeted for. Hopefully there'll be a supplemental budget at the state level that can keep those things going. But those are some of the pieces that are a bit out of our control, and yet we have to make sure we kind of meet all of these different stay within all of these assumptions as much as is possible. So open to feedback from any of our colleagues if there's other things certainly that we missed. But
And before we do feedback, Mr. Girardi, could you just talk about the calendar as well?
Yes. Sure.
For committee members, yeah.
So we developed the calendar here, and at the next meeting, we'll come together to vote on if both the assumptions and guidelines are what you believe to be appropriate, and then the calendar as well. We're working backwards from when we would like to have the school committee vote in April for our final budget that would be pushed forward to our town meeting in May. We will kick off in December formally as a school committee team to begin unpacking the budget. It'll be our initial budget presentation in early December. We're planning a series of meetings through December, January, with Dr. Sawyer's first budget presentation in early February. We'll be working parallel with the town manager and the town manager's calendar and their schedule for information, and making sure that our assumptions and the override agreement that we have with them is being considered as we're developing our budget, and then paying attention to the governor's budget. So looking at both state, our local calendars, and aligning ours with theirs so that we're able to be ready for the town meeting vote in May.
Perfect, thank you. Any feedback or questions? John?
Yeah, first off, I'd like to thank everybody that's worked on this. I really appreciate the work and the thoughtfulness that went into these guidelines. I think it's important to keep the override commitment as that North Star. I like that. It is, after all, the decision that was made by the residents, and we need to make sure that we are transparent. We hold to our commitments to the town on that. And I appreciate Ms. Heffernan acknowledging living the pain of budget seasons prior to May of 2021 was an experience that we haven't felt clearly in a couple years. I know certainly Ms. Fritz and Dr. Sawyer have lived it longer prior to that, but it is just a different experience altogether, a positive experience, something that we can look forward to and not try to kind of trim around the edges of a budget gap, right? It's just completely different. So, and I do appreciate as well the focus on advancing literacy initiatives and also looking after the well-being of our students and staff. I think that's critically important as we move forward, and also look at what potential investments could assist that, next year, right? So, I fully support these priorities.
I also want to thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I really, looking at the priorities in this, and also going back to the meeting that we had last week and meeting with district leaders and really hearing their feedback, these are so important, and these are really the big points for the year, not just this year, but moving forward. It's not that we're doing anything extra that we don't have to do. These are so critical, like, the staff well-being and literacy. These are all major areas that we need to put an emphasis in, and it's tough that if you have to cut and add, and because these are all equally important to each other. I'm not sure that I would add anything. I mean, there's definitely areas that we can dig deeper into to parse out what may need more, but I appreciate the work that went into this, because this is really very comprehensive for us to go off of.
I'd like to just echo the comments of my colleagues. I think this is a job well done. I really think these are the main priorities that I see as well. I'm very happy that the career and technical piece is mentioned here as well. We really haven't discussed that, but that's obviously something that we still need to, keep our eye on and continue to develop. And I also like that the supports for students with complex educational, social, emotional, behavioral needs is on here as we've heard that's kind of, an issue this year that's really coming to the forefront, even more so post-COVID. So I think you did a very nice job coming up with these priorities. And as Ms. Sharifa-Poor said, I think, there may be some more layers to a lot of these, but just for, I really don't see anything that you've missed, so thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think it's, go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just going to add one thing to just remind my colleagues and for those watching that there are two TBD dates on this calendar, and those are really important, and they'll be set, and likely maybe in December and February, but those are the dates when we will do our joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. That's part of the override agreement. For those who watched or participated in town meeting, that's our opportunity to check in on the override stabilization fund, to collectively, as two bodies responsible really for the overarching finances of the town, to make sure we know where are we, not just this year, but over subsequent years. But it's important part for us to kind of be planning for, right, that John, we're living in the better times, but that doesn't mean it's here forever, and we have to kind of pay attention to those out years too. And so those are in here, and while not maybe relative to this development cycle, this budget development cycle, the next couple years, we have to be paying attention to that fund and where it is, and while it's healthy right now, we know we'll have to soon start to draw down upon it, because that is how this was planned for. So I just want to make sure we noted that partnership with, I think, the select board is just critical to all of this working. So, thank you.
It's a fluid process. We know, this is what we're thinking of. However, we don't know what unknowns may occur during the school year, and that can happen. So it is fluid. It does lend to movement, and that's what we want to see. It also ties directly into the new strategic priorities and goals. That is, you have a direct connection to what the district wants to do, and then the funding source for it. And as Ms. Heffernan said, I think the collaboration with town manager, Mr. Mizikar, and then the select board is key. That is a great working relationship, started before the last override and has continued since. And I think it makes a much easier process, and we have knowledge and we know what's coming or what might not be coming, so that we can really plan appropriately and not have to look at maybe what we're cutting first, but what we can actually add based on our priorities and goals. So thank you to Mr. Girardi and Dr. Sawyer and their leadership on this.
Thank you.
Dr. Sawyer, any comments or questions?
I certainly want to thank you and Ms. Heffernan for serving on the Finance Subcommittee and having that conversation with Mr. Girardi and myself to try to take an initial draft and make it stronger. I concur. I think this gives a very clear roadmap to what we would be moving towards to consider for an initial budget presentation in early February. It's a complex process. There's a lot that goes on under the hood, so to speak, with the business office team and finance team, and but it's ultimately a team effort, and this part of the process provides clarity and transparency, as Mr. Girardi mentioned. So I do see it as a positive piece. It'll be posted on our website tomorrow. If people in the community want to provide feedback between now and the next meeting on November 15th, when we'll ask you to vote to formally approve the priorities and guidance, and then also the budget calendar. So appreciate the feedback, and thank you for the clarity of expectations.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to have a report from Mr. Girardi on our warehouse rental closeout plan. During COVID, the school department did rent warehouse space for furniture storage, and at this point, we're going to be closing it out and a vote on how that will take place. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Girardi.
Thank you. At the September 27th meeting, I presented a closeout plan with the goal of closing out 220 Barber Avenue in Worcester, Mass. By October 31st to terminate our lease and take away a cost of $2,500 a month in lease cost. The warehouse was a pretty full place. It did collect a lot of furniture over the couple of years of COVID. Schools have adapted different learning styles, different practices, and with ESSER funding that happened during COVID, we were able to procure some new furniture that we're sitting with overabundance of some furniture that is not currently useful for our schools. So we held a public auction following our Mass General Law, Chapter 30B, Section 15 process for disposal of our supplies. And on Friday, October 13th, Saturday, October 14th, although a bit rainy, another rainy Saturday, who would have thought this season. We held our public auction, and on those 2 days, we raised about $900 and just under $1,000. It was a good effort. Following that, we worked with engaging local charitable organizations to donate or continue to sell furniture, the remaining furniture. We had more success here. We were able to engage 2 different charitable organizations. One is an extended day program, after-school program, and we're able to sell almost $1,000 worth of furniture to them. And we were able to partner with a group out of Worcester to donate furniture to their efforts of supplying schools in Jamaica with comfortable seating in their rural schools. So a good news story is we are very low in what we have for furniture remaining at the warehouse. We are prepared, pending your decision, to bring a dumpster to that location. We have a plan to donate all the metal that's remaining, people coming in to unscrew the legs on the chairs so that what we would dispose of would be less than one disposal container dumpster of supplies there. We have identified that there is still useful furniture there. We've identified storage both at Parker Road, where we have a storage container there, and some things have already been brought to the floral basement. Anything that we would be throwing away, we feel is of no longer use to either us or to another entity. So we're very proud of that, and I have to give a lot of credit to my assistant finance and operations manager, April Yu. You met her a few weeks ago during our transportation meeting. She has been ferocious at connecting with people to really put what we had as overflow into really good hands, into good practice, and something that we're proud of. So anything that we would be disposing of is what we consider to be not useful to anyone.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? None. Thank you. I think you're new to the role, and this is like in all my years on the committee, I've never heard of us having to do something like this, so it's a good news story. So, we're getting some funding back from it, plus other charitable organizations are going to be able to use some of this as well. So I think it's a great story, and we're saving on that monthly rental fee going forward. So, thank you. Dr. Sawyer, any comments or
Just thanks to
questions?
Mr. Girardi and Ms. Yu for their hard work and the various people who have been part of the process. And we are pleased again to be able to take advantage of what we needed to do during COVID to upgrade furniture in different ways, and then now be able to have some on hand as extras, but then be able to properly dispose of the rest. So appreciate the work, and we certainly recommend that you vote to allow us to continue.
Thank you. Okay, we do need to vote on this plan. So may I have a motion that the committee vote to authorize the disposal of all remaining school department items stored in the warehouse located at 220 Barber Ave, Worcester, Mass., due to being deemed not useful in accordance with School Committee Policy 802, disposal of used equipment/supplies, and in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30B, Section 15.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you again. Okay, next we have our minutes from our meeting on October 11th, 2023. Are there any changes or corrections? Seeing none, those can be marked as accepted as distributed. And we do need to go into executive session this evening for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements. Purpose 7, Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22FG, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes, and B, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect of the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 3, the Shrewsbury Education Association Units A and/or B, the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association, and/or the Cafeteria Workers Association, where deliberation in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, and we will return to open session only for the purpose of adjourning for the evening. May I have a motion that we adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote is required. Ms. Shrivelpour?
Aye.
Mr. Wensky?
Aye.
Ms. Boucher?
Aye.
Ms. Heffernan?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Thank you and good night.